The old lighthouse keeper, Silas, a man weathered like the stones of his tower, squinted into the churning gray of the Arabian Sea. A squall was brewing, the kind that clawed at the land and howled secrets into the night. He'd seen countless storms in his 70 years, each one a fresh etching on the map of his memory. But tonight felt different. A disquiet, cold and sharp, pricked at him. His gaze drifted towards the small fishing village nestled at the foot of the cliff. Lights flickered like nervous fireflies in the windows of the tightly packed homes. He knew most of the families there, their joys, their squabbles, the rhythm of their lives dictated by the tides and the whims of the ocean. Tonight, however, a subtle disharmony vibrated beneath the surface of their usual tranquility, a tremor he couldn't quite place. Hours earlier, a new family had arrived, their small boat bobbing awkwardly amidst the familiar vessels. A man, Elias, with eyes that darted like trapped birds, his wife Sarah, whose beauty held a fragile, almost haunted quality, and their son Finn, a boy of perhaps 7 with a shock of unruly blonde hair and an unnervingly silent demeanor. They were outsiders, and in a village where lineage stretched back generations, outsiders were often viewed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Silas had watched as old man Junith, the village elder, had offered them a small vacant cottage near the edge of the settlement, his face etched with a politeness that didn't quite reach his eyes. The whispers had already begun, carried on the salty breeze like seeds of doubt. Where had they come from? Why had they chosen their quiet, isolated haven? As darkness deepened, the wind began to moan around the lighthouse, a mournful sound that echoed Silas's unease. He busied himself with the lamp, its powerful beam slicing through the growing gloom, a beacon of guidance in the impending tempest. But even the steady rhythm of its rotation couldn't dispel the unsettling feeling that clung to him. Later that night, the storm broke with a furious intensity. Rain lashed against the glass of the lantern room, and the wind howled like a tormented beast. Silas, wrapped in his thick wool shawl, kept vigil, his eyes scanning the turbulent waters. He saw the small fishing boats tugging fiercely at their moorings, their silhouettes barely visible in the downpour. Suddenly, a different kind of sound cut through the roar of the storm, a thin, desperate cry quickly swallowed by the wind. Silas froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. It had sounded like a child. He strained his ears, listening intently. For a long moment, there was only the relentless fury of the storm. Then he heard it again, fainter this time, almost lost in the wind's lament. It definitely came from the direction of the village. Ignoring the biting wind and the treacherous rain-slicked stairs, Silas descended the lighthouse with a speed that belied his age. He had to know. He had to be sure. He stumbled out into the tempest, the rain instantly soaking him to the bone. The village was a blur of indistinct shapes and flickering lamplight. The cries were intermittent now, muffled, but they pulled him forward like an invisible thread. He found the source near the edge of the village, close to the new family's cottage. A small group of villagers huddled together, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Manjunath stood at the forefront, his usually stern face pale in the flickering light of a lantern. "Silas," he said, his voice tight. "It's Finn. He's gone." Zara stood huddled against Elias, her body shaking with sobs, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored the storm raging around them. Elias's face was a mask of bewildered anxiety, his darting eyes now frantic as he scanned the darkness. The whispers Silas had heard earlier now coalesced into muttered accusations. The newcomers, they were strangers. Something wasn't right. Suspicion hung heavy in the air, thicker than the rain. Silas, however, felt a different kind of prickling sensation. It wasn't suspicion, but a deep, unsettling familiarity with the raw edge of Zara's grief. He had seen that look before, years ago, in the eyes of another mother who had lost her child. "Has anyone searched properly?" Silas asked, his voice cutting through the hushed murmurs. Manjunath shook his head. "The storm, It's too dangerous. We were waiting for it to ease. Waiting? Silas's voice rose. A child is missing. We can't just wait. Ignoring the protests, Silas grabbed a lantern and started towards the dense thicket of trees that bordered the village on the other side. The villagers hesitated. Then, spurred by Silas's urgency, a few of the younger men followed. The search was arduous. The storm raged on, turning the ground into a muddy quagmire. Thorny bushes snagged at their clothes, and the wind threatened to extinguish their lanterns at every turn. Hours crawled by, filled only with the sound of the wind, the rain, and their increasingly desperate calls for Finn. Just as despair began to settle in, Silas heard it again. A faint whimper, almost swallowed by the storm. He held up his hand, silencing the others. The sound came again, closer this time. They followed the sound, pushing through a tangle of undergrowth until they reached a small, dilapidated shed, half hidden by overgrown vines. The whimper was clearer now, definitely coming from inside. With a surge of adrenaline, Silas pushed open the creaking wooden door. Inside, huddled in a corner, was Finn. He was shivering, his face streaked with tears and mud, but otherwise unharmed. Relief washed over Silas, so potent it almost buckled his knees. The other searchers gasped, their faces illuminated by the flickering lanterns. But then, Silas saw something else in the shed, something that sent a fresh wave of unease through him. In the dim light, he spotted a small, intricately carved wooden bird lying on the dirt floor near Finn. It was a toy, one he recognized. It belonged to old Alara, a reclusive woman who lived alone in a small hut further up the coast. Alara, who had always been a little unstable. As they led a shaken but unharmed Finn back to his frantic parents, Silas's mind raced. Zara's haunted eyes, Elias's nervous demeanor, the immediate suspicion of the villagers, it had all been a distraction. Back in the village, as Finn was being wrapped in warm blankets, Silas quietly approached Manjana. Manjana, he said, his voice low. Did anyone see Alara tonight? The old man frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. No, I don't think so. She keeps to herself, especially during storms. Silas didn't voice his suspicions aloud. He needed proof. But the carved bird, the isolated shed, it all pointed in a disturbing direction. Elias, the next morning, as the storm finally subsided and the sun peeked through the clouds, casting a fragile golden light on the village, Silas made his way towards Alara's hut. The path was muddy and strewn with fallen branches, but his resolve was firm. He found Alara sitting on her porch, rocking gently, a vacant smile on her face. He noticed a scratch on her arm, partially hidden by her shawl. Alara, Silas said gently. Did you see Finn last night? Her smile didn't waver. The little bird, it was lost. Silas's heart sank. He knew then. Alara, in her confused state, had taken Finn. Perhaps she hadn't meant any harm, but the fear she had instilled, the accusations that had flown, he persuaded Alara to come back to the village with him. Manjunath, initially skeptical, paled when he saw the scratch on her arm and heard Silas's quiet explanation. The villagers were stunned. Their suspicion of the newcomers had blinded them to the truth. Zara and Elias, who had endured their silent accusations with quiet dignity, were overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. Later that day, Silas sat with Zara and Elias. Zara's haunted look had softened, replaced by a weary but profound relief. Elias's eyes, though still carrying a trace of their earlier anxiety, held a newfound warmth. We don't know how to thank you, Silas, Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. Everyone. They looked at us like we were monsters. Silas nodded. Fear can make people see things that aren't there. You were strangers. It's easy to cast blame when you're afraid. But you didn't, Elias said, his gaze steady. You looked beyond the fear. Silas smiled, a rare and genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I've seen enough storms in my life to know that the most dangerous darkness isn't always the one you can see. The incident served as a stark reminder to the villagers about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of looking beyond first impressions. They offered heartfelt apologies to Zara and Elias, their initial suspicion replaced by shame and a desire to make amends. Finn, though shaken, slowly returned to his cheerful self, his laughter once again echoing through the small cottage. Zara's beauty seemed to regain some of its lost luster, and Elias's shoulders seemed to relax, the tension that had clung to him since their arrival finally easing. As for Ilara, the village decided, with Silas's gentle guidance, that she needed care. They arranged for her to stay with a kind woman in a neighboring village who had experience with such matters, ensuring she would be safe and looked after. The squall had passed, leaving the air cleansed and the sea calmer. Silas stood in the lantern room of the lighthouse, the steady beam cutting through the twilight. He looked down at the village, the lights now glowing with a renewed sense of community and understanding. The storm had brought fear and suspicion, but in its wake it had also revealed the importance of compassion and the strength found in looking beyond the surface. The little wooden bird, once a symbol of a child's vulnerability and a community's misplaced fear, now served as a quiet reminder that even in the darkest of nights, the light of empathy could always find its way. And Silas, the old lighthouse keeper, knew that this was a lesson the village would carry with them long after the sea had forgotten the fury of the storm. The arrival of the new family, initially a source of unease, eventually became a catalyst for a deeper connection within the village. Zara, a talented weaver, shared her skills with the local women, her intricate patterns and vibrant colors breathing new life into their traditional crafts. Elias, a quiet but skilled fisherman, proved to be a valuable asset to the community, his knowledge of the deeper currents and hidden fishing grounds leading to more plentiful catches. Finn, once silent and withdrawn, gradually blossomed in the warmth of the village children's acceptance. He spent his days exploring the rocky coastline, his laughter mingling with the cries of the gulls, his initial shyness replaced by a bright and infectious energy. The memory of Ilara's confused actions faded with time, replaced by a collective understanding of her vulnerability and a renewed commitment to caring for the less fortunate within their community. The villagers learned to look out for one another with a greater sensitivity, recognizing that appearances could be deceiving and that judging others based on their unfamiliarity could lead to unnecessary fear and division. Silas, from his vantage point in the lighthouse, watched the transformation with a quiet satisfaction. The storm had tested the village, but it had also revealed their capacity for compassion and their inherent goodness. The light he tended each night now seemed to shine on a community that had learned a valuable lesson about empathy and the enduring power of human connection. The positive note that lingered in the salty air was not just the absence of the storm, but the quiet harmony of a village that had weathered its fears and emerged stronger and more united.